We made this. Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, is now on Patreon, where you can support the show's production and gain access to all kinds of bonus features and content. To subscribe, check out what we offer at patreon.com/Make It So podcast. That's patreon.com/Make It So podcast. Thanks for listening, and Helmsman,
engage. I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise.
Michael Burnham, pleased to meet you.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
We will continue exploring, discovering new worlds, new civilizations. That is the United Federation of Planets. That is Starfleet.
Make it so.
Hello everyone and welcome to Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast. We are here to discuss Star Trek Discovery, and this particular episode being episode 4, Choose Your Pain. And to join me on this episode is a returning guest, and Lee Hutchison. How are you doing, Lee? How's it going?
Yeah, really good. I'm looking forward to spending a few lockdown hours in your company.
Oh, thank you very much. It's much appreciated. I'm sure that many of people are doing many things during lockdown. We did an X-Files live last night for the first time on the Xcast, so that was really interesting to do that and to get our teeth into that, which was really good fun. And I also know that you've been doing quite a bit of running as well, haven't you? You've been placing that on Twitter quite a bit as well. So how's that going?
I've been doing a hell of a lot more podcasting, plenty of running. When you're kind of a football fan, enjoy going to the cinema, going to races, out for meals, and all that gets stripped away from you. It's kind of coming down to the bare essentials of life. So yeah, it's just been kind of going out running, podcasting with you yourselves, my own and stuff. So it's been kind of just trying to, enjoy the simple things, I guess.
Yeah, well, only today, I don't know if you've seen the press conference that was just an hour ago. There were one of the questions that came up was really interesting, that they were talking about the Liverpool-Madrid game.
Oh, yes.
So they were saying, was that wise to have that game go ahead back on the 11th of March? So that was something I wasn't expecting today. So
for someone that dislikes Liverpool Football Club, to see them lose and go out of the Champions League, it was worth it on one level. I'm sure health issues wise, bad idea, but for someone as bitter as me, I was quite happy to see that. I mean, here in Scotland, like they were going to do just like a few days after that, we were going to have the Old Firm, which is Celtic Rangers, big derby. And the Scottish government were like, we're going to put in a sort of lockdown on events just after Sunday, though. So, feel free to have 50,000 people all mingle in the stadiums and then in pubs and surrounding areas. And then we'll kind of go into lockdown mode. So it's been absolutely bizarre, these sorts of things.
Yeah, it is. And you absolutely hating Liverpool. We're not going to get on very well.
Sadly, I'm still not over the Champions League final. So one day. Right.
Okay. Let's move back into the TV world and the Star Trek universe as a whole. You were last on with Tony with Broken Pieces for Star Trek Picard, which was only a couple of episodes away from the finale. How did you find the finale of Picard for the rest of the episodes after Broken Pieces?
Yeah, the finale was a mixed bag for me. It was certainly probably the weaker side of season 1, but for me, ultimately, I was able to put a lot of my issues, maybe frustrations aside, because that last act, the last 15-20 minutes, with the Picard being reunited with Data in that scene, how much that changed how I view Next Generation. To show that I was born in 1987, so I am of the next generation, it could be argued. And I followed that through, and I was there till Nemesis and then Picard, and it's made me kind of reevaluate how I looked at one of my favorite shows of all time, that it's a love story between Picard and Data. And I kind of touched on that in Broken Pieces, and just that scene was worth it. And I think the finale, I can almost see a clash between sort of like the Alex Kurtzman side of, these big ideas and kind of perhaps, the action elements and so on, with kind of compared with sort of Michael Chabon, who I can imagine this literary guy that's able to sort of really kind of write some of the some of the best dialogue that we've probably seen in any of the Star Trek franchise. It's certainly up there anyway. And I just thought that last act, no matter what we had to do to get there, I thought the season 1 of Picard was all the worthwhile for that moment. And I thought it was a good season, and I'm really looking forward to the next. But yeah, I thought that was just an absolutely special moment.
It was, and I don't think you'll be alone in that. I think pretty much everyone across the board have just absolutely adored those last 20 minutes. And you're right with the Chabon thing. I think we mentioned that with myself and Darren when we talked about the finale there, and you can tell it's done by a literary person, and I think it was all the better for it. I think it was a perfect way of ending and reconstituting the Nemesis ending, the parting of ways and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm in total agreement with that, and I am looking forward to season 2 to see what that may well bring once we find out when that's ever going to air. In our current status, we just don't know what's happening at the moment, and we've still got some treks to look forward to, haven't we? We've got Lower Decks coming, that Section 31 show's meant to be coming soon at some point in the future. So, and then obviously Star Trek Discovery season 3, which is what we're waiting for while we're doing this. So there's plenty of Trek to look at and to look forward to. But today we are looking at Choose Your Pain, and it first aired on the 15th of October in 2017. The story was by Gretchen J. Berg and Aaron Harbert and Kemp Powers. It was directed by Lee Rose. And this episode sees the introduction of original series character Harry Mudd, imprisoned, and he is imprisoned with Ash Tyler, our new character that comes into the show, and of course Lorca aboard a Klingon ship. First off, with this episode, Lee, what are your initial thoughts on the episode as a whole before we delve deep into the episode itself?
Yeah, when I kind of had the opportunity to come back on this podcast, I was given a free reign of, here's all the episodes. Is there any that you fancy? And I was like, I'm happy to discuss anything. So it was a real kind of, lottery for me what was going to come next. Yeah. And when I got offered this one, I was like, yeah, I'm really kind of pleased with this one. We get to see Ash Tyler's first appearance into the show, a kind of Star Trek conundrum about life and how we treat it. A person that's sort of not necessarily the typical captain figure being thrust into sort of a leadership position and how they handle it. And we get to see, some interesting sides to sort of the Klingon race. So there was a lot here that was really exciting, and that's got me quite keen to dive into it. And I hadn't seen it since the first time I watched it all the way back a couple of years ago. So I really enjoyed it this afternoon. It was a brisk 44 minutes adventure, and I think there's plenty here to talk about, which is always kind of exciting with shows like this.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm finding, I remember watching the episodes as they aired week by week, and I think I mentioned this on my last recording, that sometimes, I wouldn't say the words necessarily getting carried away, but, it's very fresh, it's very new, and it's very different, and in some ways a lot similar. A lot of tropes within this is very Star Trek, but there is the, you're listening in, you're checking out reviews, you're going online and, straight after the show and seeing what people are thinking. And, occasionally you might just get swayed one way or the other. And overall, every episode I went to, it was week by week, needed to watch the next one to see what happened. And I enjoyed the show. But what's really made it interesting is having that subjectiveness being 2 or 3 years away from it now. I'm going back through these episodes because I've covered the first 2 episodes and then this one. And I'm doing a rewatch as I'm going along as well. So it's obviously I'm not going to be on the next episode, but I'll be rewatching that as well. Watch that a couple of times. And I'm finding that I'm actually really, really enjoying them a lot more than what I thought I would be. And that's no detriment to the actual episode itself, not by any stretch of the imagination. But it is just the way that having distance really, really helps. And I think this episode in particular has a lot of things going on in there. And in some ways it's all the better for it. What would you rate the episode out of 10 then, if you were to give it a rating?
Oh, that's a tricky one, and I think that's what is somewhat so difficult with rating Discovery and Picard episodes to an extent, because we're obviously in lockdown at the moment, and the other week I got access to an Excel spreadsheet which has from all the way back from the man trap to present day, the release order episodes of Star Trek, how they came out in sort of calendar order. Because obviously there's going to become a period where Next Generation and Deep Space Nine overlapped, and then into Voyager and so on. And I've kind of started off, so I'm kind of nearing the end of season 1 of the original series. And it's so easy to go, God, The Balance of Terror, fantastic episode, 5 out of 5. Or there might be an episode like The Squire, I can't remember. That wasn't so good, that's a 2. Whereas when it gets into sort of these episodes, it's like, oh, that is a really good part, but you're almost rating it on a sliding curve of like, well, they're slightly better in season 1, or you might think, well, actually it's a 3 out of 5 episode, but actually how much it pays off in later episodes actually makes me retroactively go back and give it a 4. So it becomes very difficult. You almost start going, well, I would give season 1 of Discovery this. It's very difficult to sort of put them into isolation. It's not our typical Trek that we grew up with. Yeah. Even in Deep Space Nine, when it was really serialized, I found it quite easy to sort of rate an individual episode. I've sort of struggled with that with the new kind of era, but I think overall I'd probably give it like a, compared to the other episodes in this season and so on, I'd probably give it like a 6. And that might sound a bit critical, but I think it's a fine episode and one that I think pays off really well as the season unfolds.
Yeah, I wouldn't be far away from you, actually. I'd say it's 6.5, maybe 7. Of the episodes that I've seen so far, I'm actually quite surprised how solid overall it is. It's probably not as good as some of the stuff that's gone before. So there's a bit of a dip, but at the same time, it is expanding the universe, or the Discovery cast at least, anyway, because we're getting one additional characters, but also, we've bedded in with Michael now, and we've got this new kind of aspect of, like of Stamets' character and things like that. So I think that, and Saru involving Saru a bit more, which I think really works. So yeah, so I think that that in itself is really helpful for it, but it might, just because of that, there's quite a lot of stories involved in this one, and there seems to be, ABC plots or whatever you want to call them. So yeah, but it's thoroughly enjoyable is the word I would do. So I think we should maybe just delve deeper into the episode, and we'll take it from there. So let's go and do that right now. Make it so. Okay, so the teaser sets up the premise quite well, I think. The characters throughout the episode are choosing their own punishment, is the way that I saw that, and obviously Choose Your Pain is the title of the actual episode itself. And I think that the teaser works really well when looking back on that, because it works well in regard, it sets up what we're going to discuss here. So it starts off with like a dream sequence, and the other side of it is Lorca going to this meeting and speaking to the Starfleet around a table about how we've got, and we'll talk about this in a bit more detail once we get through the credits, but it starts talking about Discovery and the spore drive, and how the spore drive is going to change the war. And we've got, they're being told Discovery has to hold back now, and they've got to basically, we need to go out and search for more tardigrades effectively, so we can have multitudes of ships that are around. And we also find a little bit more about the fact that the two characters here that are going to be quite an interesting dynamic going forward in Lorca and Katrina. They both use their first names, in Gabriel and Katrina. So what did you think to the opener and the teaser in that regard, and how it all kind of sets up the stall ready for the rest of the episode?
It certainly covers quite a lot in terms of the teaser there. I mean, we certainly have quite a few plot points that are going through this episode. I thought it was really interesting, and I'm a sucker for sort of Starfleet people sitting around tables discussing the state of play, and when you have like what I know in sort of, I don't think they class them in this generation, but the Akuda boards, where it's like, this is how the war is unfolding and so on. And I found it quite interesting to sort of see, the Federation politic of how these people are trying to get through the war. And, I thought that was quite interesting, really. And then sort of it feels like a very traditional Star Trek kind of plot of like, we've seen it in a few episodes. We have this transport system in terms of this warp drive, but it's going to be to the detriment of, another species, and in this case, the tardigrade. So, yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and it was sort of one of my kind of things I really enjoyed about season 1 of Discovery was sort of this spore drive, tardigrades, all that sort of thing that will go with it, mushrooms. I thought that was such a really fun sci-fi idea to see kind of fully embraced in sort of a mainstream quote-unquote sci-fi TV series like Discovery. So yeah, there was a lot kind of going on in this teaser, and then it kind of ends on quite the cliffhanger when obviously Lorca faces down a D7 battlecruiser and finds himself abducted. So yeah, a lot to look forward to in the episode, I think.
Got Lorca on that shuttle, and the Klingon D7 does appear, and the pilot is taken out quite quickly. They were obviously after Lorca. They don't quite know as well, and we'll probably touch upon this at some point, but they don't quite know why, how Lorca's doing it. We one of the things about the Starfleet talk is that they're worried that the Klingons have found out about this technology when it isn't quite that. They haven't actually found that out, but they're trying to get hold of Lorca to find that what the secret is, which, as I say, sets up the credits quite nicely. But let's start by, as we come out of this, that's the main credit sequence, but let's start by talking about Starfleet's position on the spore drive then, because we can talk about the tardigrade and that throughout the episode and how that all comes together. It's interesting, you mentioned about, classic Star Trek and stuff like that it really brings up like an ethical dilemma with Ripper, as it's been nicknamed, or the tardigrade. And it really brings that to the forefront, that Starfleet want to actively seek out these. I'm guessing from what was said by Culber that the non-sentient, or they believe that the non-sentient creatures, and that Discovery single-handedly dealt with one of these events that have been on screen with regards to the saving of the mining colony, that they've just magically appeared there and saved them, and the other two events that they talk about we don't see on screen, but this is what's really pushing them to seek out these tardigrades and to make use of them for the spore drives and stuff like that. So with that in mind, that Starfleet have actually changed their mission path to seek out these tardigrades. Before we touch upon what Michael's concerns are, I mean, what did you make to that? We mentioned it as an interesting sci-fi trope there, but the ramifications that may have come of that in another TV series might have been delved into in even more depth. I'm thinking things like potentially The Measure of the Man or other TNG episodes. But what did you make to that?
Yeah, there can be an argument that in the sort of 43 minutes, whatever this episode kind of takes place is, it kind of discusses sort of the tardigrade, and they have the debates and arguments. And I suppose the difference between this and Measure of a Man, for example, is that, this is something that will kind of come up through the season and sort of into next season as well, of this kind of network and these creatures and how they all work, and, the damage that Discovery does, it kind of impacts sort of well beyond this episode as well, which is, I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, I think it's, it's certainly an interesting debate, because, we can all sit there afterwards, if we were all sitting around the dinner table and going, well, it's a time of war, they're being slaughtered. Hey, we saw the success of it in this previous mission with the mining colony. We saw those happy people looking up and going, wow, thanks for kind of saving our lives. Is it worth it? Is a creature worth it in kind of wartime? And I think it, when people sometimes make these arguments, oh, this isn't Star Trek and so on. I mean, there we go. This is like episode 4, where we're really getting into the meat and bones of sort of like a very traditional Star Trek story, while at the same time doing something new, a little bit darker as well, which complements it. So I think there's certainly a nice debate and argument to be had here. I think most people that would probably watch Star Trek would err on the side of, we've got to look after these creatures, there's got to be a different and better way. But, that's part of the debate that Star Trek's always kind of looked to have with the audience, I guess.
Yeah, and it's ultimately the actual, by the end of it, we get that kind of thing being played out, really, don't we? With the fact that the tardigrade goes down to 1% of its mass, and Michael's the one that actually releases it back into where it belongs, and as you say, does come back into the storyline further down the line. But what I quite like about it, and you mentioned this to a point, that the tardigrade story is a very kind of a Star Trek concept and idea and thought about it, but with regards to Discovery itself, what I particularly keen to delve into is the way that Michael's been dealt with from a character point of view up until this point. That we're seeing a different side to her. We're seeing more of an empathic side to her, but also the fact that she's also brought into the conversation Stamets, and how, he's been a bit standoffish in the past couple of episodes. Has been the conversation that Michael and Stamets have had in recent history about the fact that Michael was to blame for the war, that he's a scientist, that he doesn't want to be in this position. He wants to be, looking into the science and finding all these wonders and stuff like that. But he is very standoffish with that, and he's also against Lorca in the previous episodes as well. They've seen him as a warmonger. But this definitely softens him up some way. And, he's the one eventually that takes the risk and, and pushes the envelope which is ultimately something which technically is illegal, but it seems to be the right thing to do. So what did you make to bringing in these character arcs of those two, especially, with regards to this, that they are kind of spreading their wings a little bit with the idea, the concept of the characters around them?
Yeah, I think that's what I think. It was an interesting sort of idea, and I've really kind of enjoyed it. Was this sort of, you have the opening 2 episodes, which are sort of like a prologue, and then we kind of dive into the next episode, which then kind of gives us almost the pilot in a way of discovery of like, here we are on the ship, and sort of we have our little first mission. But I suppose it's crazy to think we're only in our second hour of being introduced to some people like the Paul Stamets and the Tillys, and then sort of seeing how some of those relationships with Saru, who we've known a bit longer, and Michael. So yeah, it feels like it's had a slightly unconventional start to how you would maybe launch a Star Trek series, but then it's sort of doing that kind of traditional thing of like, here's a mission, here's a conflict, how do they come together and show their kind of Starfleet wits and wills, and to come a bit closer at the end. You think of something like what's that, kind of the Voyager episode, I think it's like the second episode, where like they're going through that nebula and they're trying to escape, and you've kind of got some of the tension there. I think it's always quite exciting to see that in a Star Trek show of like, right, let's bring them together and then let's have that Starfleet mission and see how they kind of overcome it, I guess.
We'll pick up on Saru in a second with regard to all of this as well. But just before we do that, just to touch upon Stamets a bit more, before we move any further, that what he basically does at the end of this episode is sacrifices himself to effectively release the pain. He's chosen the pain instead of giving it to the tardigrade. And a lot of that is to do with what Saru has to do, and Lorca's abduction puts them on a ticking time clock, really, and that's you mentioned about the propulsion of the episodes, like in Voyager or whatever, that you need that ticking time clock, because that effectively gives you the impression of what pressures that likes of Saru is under. But on Stamets in particular, because we won't go too much into Stamets during the course of this episode, but he makes this choice, and obviously the very end scene, which is one of the scenes I remember most from the first season, as like, oh, now this is something I can get on board with. So what did you make to his story through this? Because he really only gets picked up, as I say, some of the stuff that he gets brought into by Michael, and then obviously making that choice at the end. Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of the Paul Stamets character, and I really liked his sort of arc over this episode, that he is someone that, I know we kind of touched on earlier, some people argue this isn't kind of Star Trek, but I've always viewed the first season as, we've talked about, you have the first 2 hours, which are sort of a prologue. In a way, sort of this first season, in a way, is a prologue of getting us towards a kind of Starfleet mission. This is a crew at wartime. We haven't come to a wartime situation like 15 episodes in, like the original series, like we saw with the Balance of Terror, or Deep Space Nine when it was season 4, then 6 and so on, where we saw them under that. We are seeing our crew at sort of their absolute worst, and they've not been able to showcase the values that we all kind of associate with Starfleet, really. And I always kind of think like, Stamets was this scientist that had his technology sort of basically hijacked by the military, which, they always say war is a good time for invention and technology advancement. And that first season is really kind of about that growth of how does this scientist that has been basically drafted in is having to use his, technology as a kind of, a weapon of war, essentially. How do they get to kind of a place where they make peace with that and are able to sort of move on from it? And I think that's how I always kind of view Stamets, and basically kind of the larger plot of season 1. I feel that they're very much kind of intrinsically kind of tied in together.
Yeah, and as I say, I mean the final moment when he's looking in the mirror, for me is a typical. It's something that I personally enjoy from my point of view. That it adds that mystery of like, okay, now what's going on here? And we're going to talk a little bit about theories in the mailbag. There's a couple of comments that have been made which I want to pick up on, but we'll pick up that on the mailbag. So Saru has a really interesting character arc in this one as well. As I say, this one's jam packed with a lot of this type of thing of expanding the cast and the look at these characters. But he does need to process some of his issues that he has here, and one of the main things that come across with Saru is that he later in the episode starts to talk about never having Giorgio as a direct role model. Whereas Burnham kind of took that from him, and he was the third in command effectively. That Giorgio looked too much on Burnham, and that he was never going to get that option. And because of that, the way that I took that he's taken this away, and I've heard of some criticisms of Saru in this episode, but the way that I kind of view it is that he's more, he's learning off Lorca. He's kind of taken everything away from him. He hasn't had that role model to guide him into the captain's chair. He's been put into the captain's chair here by the very fact that Lorca's not there because of his abduction. And he's having to deal with these issues, and obviously there's various different scenes throughout the episode where we come across that. But how did you see Saru's characterization in this, and how he deals with this particular issue that he's having to deal with being a standing captain and acting captain during the course of Lorca's abduction, and the decisions that he's got to make as well through the episode?
I think they were quite good, really, because I think when you sort of hear about these sort of threat gangula, he seems very a cautious kind of character, really. Maybe like a cowardly lion, as it were, that would sort of this fear, you kind of feel like that's something that you need as a sort of Starfleet captain, especially probably during kind of war and sort of this Wild West kind of period of the kind of Alpha Quadrant, Beta Quadrant history. I think this kind of episode showed that he isn't just some sort of like cowardly lion, that he's actually got, strength of convictions. He is trying to kind of discover what he is like as a captain, and he can sometimes take things into account, that might just give him a bit of pause for thought, but he's not this person that's going to just shrink in the captain's chair. You don't get to sort of third in command of a starship, probably on this command training program without sort of having the minerals, I guess, to kind of take a role like that. And I think it's interesting to sort of see him feeling his way through that, and probably putting to one side an audience fear or anxiety that he's not going to be a character that's up to much, or he's going to be perhaps one note, like we've seen with some characters in Star Trek history. Oh, this is their sort of gimmick, and it's going to be just really kind of hammered home. I think that they've kind of shed a little bit of that kind of 4 episodes in.
Yeah, and I think they do that throughout the whole of this series, really, don't they? I mentioned on our look at the trailer in season 3 that they've kind of found the characters by the time we get to season 3, where you've got Tilly, Saru, and Michael being your 3 main, emotional characters that you would gravitate towards, and whether or not that's true or not is debatable, obviously, but whenever I think it's Discovery, I think of particularly those 3 characters. And Saru with things that we learn in some of the short treks and season 2 especially, where we pick up on some of his history is really quite in depth, and they have some really good moments that I'm sure that we'll cover on this podcast, and it works really well. The interesting thing here is just that he's how unsure he is, and just even by the fact that he actually asks the computer on how he does, and I have to admit that I've been in that situation before when you've looked at something and gone, how am I going to do this? And well, not necessarily ask the computer, but you look to things that you might not necessarily know and have to deal with it in that situation, and obviously he decides to look at some of the captains that have gone before him. And what did you make to one, just the character piece of that section where he's showing self-doubt, but also the use of the names that I get called up on the console?
Yeah, I really like it. I think Saru's become sort of one of my favourite kind of characters, and I think like when we talk about sort of his, I think what I like about the Saru kind of character as well is that you think of something like Next Generation, for example, where time stands still really for 7 sort of years, probably more so including the movies, and we get to see this character sort of be put in sort of a leadership position, have himself challenged, grow emotionally, and become someone that we can see become more of a kind of captain figure as kind of the episode kind of goes on, and sort of how a crew responds and reacts off that. I mean, episodes like that were sometimes quite hard to come round in the Next Generation. You had Geordi sort of put under a bit of pressure in season 1.
Yeah.
Then you kind of have Troy, maybe about season 6 or 7, I think it was, where she starts doing her command, training. Things were a bit slow really to take place there. And I think the kind of character development that we're seeing in Saru, episodes in, is something that we kind of had to, for better or worse, wait for years and years to get kind of meaningful in something like the Next Generation.
Yeah, I mean, personally, the fact that he's put under that pressure as well within this episode, as you say, it's something that it would come a lot slowly, more slowly during the course of, say, the Next Generation. But from a character point of view on this particular one, the fact that he's led down, he's already within the actual episode itself, he wants to look at himself self-assured. He's obviously not. He's overcompensating by quite a bit. He consults the computer, and then he almost goes the opposite way, and like he wants to be decisive. He wants to, save Lorca, and he ultimately makes the choice that the tardigrade needs to like sort of make the jumps and make that happen, and that obviously forces what happens with Stamets. With the whole DNA sequencing.
I mean, is he any different from us, I suppose, with relying on computers and stuff? I mean, how many times when someone maybe asks you a question, Kurt, or myself, where someone's like, right, what do we do here? Computer, typing in and getting all the answers and stuff. It's good to know something like that kind of carries on into the future. And I suppose it would be easy to kind of lean onto that, because I suppose he's still developing these relationships with his Discovery crew. The person that he knows best in terms of Michael Burnham, they're not necessarily getting on too well. You can imagine the comfort of something like a computer, of like, I just thought that was really nice, of like, what are kind of some good leadership kind of skills and abilities to have, and I thought that was quite a nice little beat. It's it's nice to know that no matter how much things change, some things still change the same in the future.
Yeah, and I'm a manager, and one of the things that I've often thought is I'm fine, I know what I'm doing, and you obviously don't, and sometimes you'll get training courses that come up and you'll be like, I don't need to go to them. Why do I need to go to this? And then you come out of it, and then a year later you go, I've learned quite a lot from that training course, actually. But it's not something you can do over the internet and just search for it and find it. You've got to live it and work it. And I think that Saru's obviously that way inclined, and I think it's a really good story element for him, and something that we'll pick up as the season develops as well. But what I really like in Saru's character, especially even this early on, is the ability to have the discussion as well. The fact that he does speak to Michael about the issues that he's had, and and that he about the Burnham and Giorgio aspect, that he wasn't able to be in that position, and Michael and Saru are developing that relationship quite early on, that we're seeing, even though that I mentioned this in the first 2 episodes, there is a competition between the two of them. They always seem to be at each other's necks at some points. But this one really emphasizes that no matter how much they get upset with each other, or have different opinions on stuff, or even make mistakes, they always seem to come back and magnetize to themselves to discuss the issues that they've just gone through. And I think that's a really good stepping stone for what will come in future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that we're starting to see these core dynamics, and I think that's Star Trek at its best, when it's not just here's our main character and how they interact with other people. It's how people all interact off each other, people's kind of quibbles and stuff like that. And I think we would get to sort of see that even sort of this sort of military ship to an extent, it's sort of a Twilight, zone kind of potentially behind every sort of like door, that there's sort of these people here that are still just really passionate scientists finding victories and everything. And, you know, when sort of Tilly and Stamets kind of, you know, they're like, F yeah. And it's like, oh, I can't believe I said that, which is very rare for almost Star Trek as well. But then they double down on it, going like, F yeah, this is good. Like, it's reminding us that probably, you know, we've had quite a few years since we've had Star Trek on the TV series, and in that time we've had sort of the Kelvin timeline movies, and regardless of what you think about them, they're not very science heavy films. And this is probably our first time sort of in, you know, 10, 15 years, well, longer than that probably, of people being like, we're Star Trek and we're about science and we're really proud of it and we're going to celebrate that, and it should be celebrated. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. And I think the next kind of thing that with regards to like Saru is just the, as I say, the emotional aspect of it, but also the fact that this tardigrade is you know, is very science based. It is the talk about the mycelial network and the fact it's a roadmap to all kinds of places that this DNA sequencing comes into it. And you know, they even mention the eugenics aspect that it is banned. I mean, they do touch upon a few like past Trek pieces of like information, whether it be really out there and you know, on the nose, or sometimes just in the background, just those little nuggets. But I did think that having the DNA sequencing was an obvious place to go down, but I think that worked for me from a like sort of the history of what Star Trek is, and especially the stuff like eugenics, which is really high up in Star Trek's lore, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was a nice little touch as well, and it's things like that I always appreciate with this, where it seemed that with, say, like Enterprise and its kind of prequel first 1 or 2 seasons, things were a bit more sort of like superficial in terms of like, this is how we first meet the Ferengi and the Klingons and such like. Whereas this, it's like, no, let's, you know, we don't have to do necessarily something that's maybe heavy-handed, which I think Discovery can be guilty of sometimes, but we can sort of pepper in sort of the history of Star Trek and show why this fits in as sort of a sequel to Enterprise, but also kind of a, you know, a prequel to a lot of Star Trek that's to come and so on. And, you know, I suppose a sequel to, you know, the Eugenic Wars, etc. like that. It might just be a little window dressing for some fans, but for people like us that are listening and discussing on a podcast, it's like, oh, yep, that I know what that means, and that's something that ticks a box for me. So I think it definitely kind of threads that line really well.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Star Trek lore, we'll move on to a particular one now, in the case of Harry Mudd. So Rainn Wilson, I think, I personally think as a character does really well to portray him. He's very kind of you know, charismatic and a fairly good fit for what the show is trying to do here. What did you think of his inclusion? Now, in the look back in hindsight, we know what's to come. We know there's a particular episode coming in a few episodes' time, which is where he takes centre stage, really. But he does have quite a significant role in this as well, with in the prison with Lorca and Ash. So, what did you think to his inclusion as a character? Do you think that they could have done it separately without the use of Harry Mudd? Given hindsight, do you think that Harry Mudd is actually a good addition to the arc and the series as a whole?
I think he's good for the series as a whole. I think his kind of upcoming episode is certainly one of the highlights of the season, and that's like a good standalone episode. You could probably go, this is an out and out 8 out of 10 or 5 out of 10, whatever, because you can sort of completely isolate that. I mean, to say if he's a success or not kind of probably will be undone in probably what I would describe next as, I could imagine an episode without him as that character in that prison cell. Yeah, but I enjoyed what we got with him. And, you know, again, it's something that I can imagine if you're a new fan. I mean, I suppose that's the problem sometimes with Star Trek and Star Trek criticism, is so much of it goes through the filter of, these are what we as super fans that get everything and have debated it, and like we talked about that last scene in the mirror, like people will go, oh yeah, I know what that means, and because did you not see the picture with Jonathan Frakes on the mirror bridge, blah blah blah. You know, we all get that, and it kind of taints somehow what we think and who this character is, of like, oh, why is it Harry Mudd? Whereas sometimes I try and view things through my girlfriend's perspective. Like, she is by no means a Star Trek fan, but she will indulge, an episode or two at a time. If it's like we're on watching Netflix and she's like, shove in whatever you want. And naturally, I will pick a Star Trek episode. But she's been pretty good. She has watched most of Discovery and most of Picard with me, picks up quite well, has thoughts and opinions on it, and things that people go, oh my God, you would have to just be a fan to get that. She's sitting there going, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I watched the episode with her and she was like, yeah, I enjoyed that character. I thought he was interesting and he made the episode more enjoyable by being there. Okay, that's good. And I will take that sometimes. I think it can be so difficult sometimes in the criticism of, our opinions as fans are very valid and we can really deep dive into it. But sometimes, the opinion of the Joe Public fan, like my girlfriend, that Star Trek needs to rely on, whether it's box office numbers, people tuning in to kind of support these sorts of shows, do rely upon. And I sometimes kind of like to try and just, filter some of my thoughts going, what do they think? What does she think? And sort of just kind of remind me of my sort of fandom and how that should kind of take things into account as well.
But on your first point, my girlfriend was the same. She watches Next Generation with me. She's not an avid viewer. There's bound to be episodes she hasn't seen. She's seen most of Voyager, hasn't really seen Deep Space Nine, but is a casual viewer and doesn't really, just watches it for the enjoyment sake of it and, doesn't really, nitpick anything at all and enjoys it for what it is. But also I think that the casting of Rainn Wilson works quite well because he's a well-known, well-loved actor, coming from a well-known show, which will automatically bring people in. Or the hope would be to bring people into the show to see what they think. And then comes my next point, which is as much as I love Star Trek, I'm a Next Generation onwards fan. And that's not to say that I don't love the original series. Actually, I'm going through a slow rewatch of the original series at the moment, and I've mentioned this before. But there is episodes in the original series I've never seen. And I don't have the memory of a lot of Star Trek episodes where, likes of Harry Mudd, I kind of half remember him. So from a personality and a character point of view, I'm actually coming more from a new Trek fan than I would be an old Trek fan in that regard, because I haven't seen or paid that much attention to the original series from that point of view. Mine was purely from a Next Generation and the original series films, is where I kind of started my adventure of the series. Now, going back to the original series now and watching them, I'm actually surprised how many I actually know. Sometimes, oh, right, okay. I've seen all the best one, the ones that have, renowned things like, I'd say, Balance of Terror and, things like, Space Seed and all those type of episodes. But, there will be, during my rewatch, some episodes I haven't seen. And, and that's a good adventure to go on in itself. But the Harry Mudd thing for me, I was aware of his character, but it didn't inform me for this particular scene. Apart from, in the background, knew who he was. But it's nice to be able to see him in a new light and to be able to do this. And I thought he was really charismatic. And I like Rainn Wilson as an actor as well. So that comes from there. But one thing he did say, though, which I thought was really interesting, given that we've now got Star Trek Picard, is the conversation that he has within the prison cell, where he's talking about the Federation citizens, that you people in Starfleet need to look out the window a bit more, because there's a lot more of us down there than there is of you up there. And I thought that was a really interesting comment to make. And what did you make to that comment and the actual way that Harry Mudd portrays that kind of idea that that we've in Star Trek have only really seen, the Starfleet kind of aspects of it. Yes, we've seen bits on other worlds and stuff, but we don't really delve into the world of the people within the Federation as much.
I totally agree with you. It really stood out on this rewatch, and I think that's been one of my kind of favourite things about sort of Picard, is that, it kind of strips you away from sort of the Starfleet that we all know and can rely upon. That, I always think of like that Stardust City rag, like the Enterprise would not turn up at a planet like that, or the Discovery, whatever, and have like pop-ups coming on, or, get into any sort of meaningful battle with an old Romulan ship. It'd just be like, fire a torpedo and disable its engines and move on. And I think like it's so good to sometimes see what is like life is outside of Starfleet, because we're so used to seeing the best, the brightest, how they all succeed and how they kind of float through life largely kind of quite well. What's it like for the people down on the surface? Because you can imagine being really pissed off if maybe you're like a Harry Mudd or a General Sort of like, for God's sake, why have they gone through that kind of wormhole? And, they've bloody brought these Dominion on kind of this threat upon us all and so on. And, what's it like for the kind of that Joe public? And sometimes we would get that with some characters like Quark and so on, who would have some really good insights onto the Federation about how, say, insidious it is in the way of the Warrior, or how reliant they are on sort of their holosuites and sonic showers all kind of running in the siege of AR-558. So I will always have places for characters like this that are outside the kind of convention. And I'm looking forward to Lower Decks for that reason, because it's almost what are the best and brightest that aren't really within the kind of Federation. What are their thoughts in it in terms of like those lower decks? Because I think that was almost what Discovery was probably pitched at as originally. It's like the main character isn't going to be the captain. It's going to be some sort of like other kind of lieutenant, what her experiences are like. And I think they kind of haven't really succeeded with that point of view. But I think with these characters kind of like Harry Mudd, then into Picard, and hopefully with Lower Decks, I think they're going to be able to sort of showcase that quite well.
Yeah, I mean, just touching upon that, that's something I was literally just about to bring up about Michael Burnham, actually, is that when this was first originally pitched, I imagined that we would see very little of a bridge. In my head, it was kind of like, we would see... some of the scenes that we see with like Lorca and what have you, and, Giorgio, but we'd be a lot more either off-world or, it's a kind of her private life. That's the way that I perceived as, in my head when they started saying, no, we're not looking at the captain. We're going to look at the first officer and some of the life around that, where, you think about Picard and his personal life. We got things like Vash and the like, but we didn't really, and obviously the episode Home, which, after the best of both worlds, but we didn't really get to know Picard, and Picard's a very, quiet man anyway. Obviously we've developed that in the new series, but in my head, Michael was going to be something different. We're going to do Star Trek differently. And I think they fell between two kind of holes there. They wanted to do that. They weren't quite willing enough to go that far away from what Star Trek is, and this episode goes to prove that in some ways with some of the stuff that we do get is in some ways is a darker aspect to Star Trek, which is the next another thing that I want to bring up, but also the fact that we see we're on the bridge a lot more, and it's a lot more about the conventional Star Trek method and use, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like with this, it's like, it is interesting to sort of see the other side. Even like one of the things I think about as well is like Deep Space Nine during the Dominion War.
Yeah.
Like we saw what it was like on board a space station and sort of then the Defiant. But I always often wonder what it'd be like for those ships that are getting like shot up in the Chintaka system, or those ships that are kind of coming back broken. Like what are they thinking about sort of Federation ways around things? What limits are they willing to push? Are they willing to sort of go outside the orthodox? We sort of see what it's like on sort of this Federation station, but what would it have been kind of like on board the flagship, or the that Excelsior ship that was always getting kind of blown up?
Yeah. The Excelsior ship, stock footage, I believe. It's like that bird of prey, isn't it, as well? That bird of prey that keeps getting blown up from the film. But yeah. So I briefly touched upon it there. So while we're talking about Harry Mudd, and we'll discuss Lorca and Tyler shortly, but. What are your general thoughts on? You mentioned like using the F-bomb twice, and Tyler says shit as well. They use the swearing quite a bit more. The TV has moved on since Enterprise back in 2005. Enterprise was very much a static, typical Star Trek show in some ways. Deep Space Nine obviously was slightly different, but they were from a different age. And, Star Trek Enterprise, towards the end, actually, they had these long story arcs and stuff like that. So that's not to throw Enterprise under the bus or anything, but they did have that. But we're in a different world now. We're in the Game of Thrones kind of world now, which, we've got these darker elements to shows and stuff like that. I mean, I'm a massive fan of Millennium, as you know. That's a huge show for me. So I'm personally aren't against it, but in the Star Trek realm, there's been a lot of criticism of it, and we start to see a little bit here, don't we, of the way that they fight the Klingons in the prison itself and how that all transpires. What are your general thoughts on the aspects of the way that the show is now?
Yeah, my thoughts are I am okay with it.
Yeah.
I understand why people have issues with it. Like, I totally get it. Like, this idea that Star Trek is like a series that they want to watch with their kids, tune in every week and not have to think, oh God, they're swearing and they're doing this and that. Like, I totally get that.
Yeah.
But on the other side, there's over, I think this episode is 734 of like 778 released. There is literally Star Trek for everyone. So if you want to watch Star Trek with your family and stuff, like, yeah, I appreciate you might not be able to show a 7 or an 8-year-old this episode or this incarnation. Maybe that will come in time, but there's plenty out there to kind of appease people. And I think the problem that Star Trek can have when it makes itself a be-all, end-all show for everyone, you kind of maybe lose some people. So, if you want to watch a show perhaps that is kind of more PG, less reliant on the violence and maybe just focused on the values and messages that I probably grew up with, there's the Next Generation. If you want something a bit maybe darker and edgier, but still very much there, you've got Deep Space Nine, Voyager, that could be a family show, and Discovery, I think it's arrogance for us to almost expect Star Trek to always appeal to us. There are Star Trek series I do not like Voyager, but there are episodes I like within it. But I cannot expect them to make constant movies and series which are tailored to my very specific kind of worldview and thoughts on things. And I think that if they keep mixing it up, which is all good, so you've got a Discovery, and then you've got your Lower Decks, and then you've got your short treks, there's plenty out there for people. So, I'm sure kids can wait and stuff, or, maybe sort of watch it through and then maybe you sort of, cover the eye at some points here and there. That's all good with me, and I personally don't have any issue with the swearing. The swearing could probably be done without easily enough, I'm sure, but I certainly see no issue to it. And, ultimately Star Trek has changed because the environment hasn't changed. It's not on sort of like syndicated TV show anymore where it's getting viewed at 6 p.m, around the dinner table. Yeah. It can be viewed by us. So, yeah, it's all fine with me.
Sometimes I think that the writers occasionally do it for doing its sake, and some, not trolling, but they do it a bit too much. And I don't mean that from like, as in they do it too much, as in, they've said the F-bomb 3 times or whatever. It's more the fact that sometimes it's like, did you really need to do that there? Or did you just do that for the sake of it? So there's that element to me that sometimes they do it just for the sake of it occasionally. But I'm not against it at all. It doesn't bother me. There's times when it works absolutely brilliantly. And I think the episode you covered, Broken Pieces, in Star Trek Picard, I thought it was used particularly well in that episode. On occasion. So I don't personally have any major opinions with it, and it's not something that would take me out of it. And I do appreciate, that you might have to occasionally just, self kind of look at it yourself and decide whether that's good for your child or whatever. And I appreciate that adds a new layer to it, but that's the world that Star Trek lives in. And you mentioned Lower Decks, for example, is an episode, is going to be a show which will be interesting to see how that transpires and how that works. And as you say, there's 734, so there's plenty of episodes to go before that as well, and some fantastic ones which we know from the history of watching these shows now that which ones are the absolutely outstanding ones that we can easily show to people. And anyone new who wants to delve into like Next Generation because of Picard, then it's a great thing. But let's go back to the main show. So we're going to talk about one of the main characters here in Lorca. What so far, his introduction up until this point, how have you felt about Lorca, considering that we do know what happens in the future with him, and there's allusions that we can see even now, which we can are able to like sort of right, okay, I can see what they did there. They've seeded that in here. But up until this point, how do you see Lorca and the way he's being portrayed, and do you particularly like his character at this point, and how it all comes together with the abduction stuff? I
love Lorca, to be honest with you. I find him such a, and I think a lot of this is down to Jason Isaacs. Hello to Jason Isaacs, obviously. I find him to be an incredibly charismatic character, and I can see why he gets away with so much of what he does, because he he's able to, he reminds me almost in a way, I've been kind of on a 24 binge recently. I managed, like, I've owned the DVDs for years and watched them all, but like it popped up on streaming last week for like 25 quid, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to get that because it is perfect to watch one after another during lockdown on that. And I've been watching that, and I kind of sort of, when I took a break from 24 to watch this episode today, I could sort of see that the Lorca Bauer thing of like, Bauer does some pretty heinous things quite frequently, and he is able to really get inside people's head and get them, whether they're terrorists, kind of, people, public members, to kind of go along with him for the greater good. And I think Lorca's kind of got that as well. He's just got that force of personality. He's got that sort of white male, slightly toxic kind of behavior where it's like, oh, he's, you can see it almost with Stam. It's like you can push and push against him sometimes, but you have no doubt that Lorca is going to win out. He's got that sort of southern military kind of drawl and vibe to him. I just find him to be such an interesting kind of character to watch, and he was definitely one of my favourites in season 1, and I really enjoyed sort of following his journey. I thought it was when he was announced that he was going to be joining the show and sort of watching him unfold, it was like, wow. It's so good when you have like a top tier actor that you can just watch that just belongs so well in this universe. And I thought the writing of Lorca was excellent. And I think, Jason Isaacs deserves a lot of that. He was quite a thin on the ground character when he was approached. He was like, no, I want to know what the plot of this character is before I commit. And I think he certainly posed a challenge to the cast and the creative team, similar to probably Patrick Stewart did really with Picard. Was like, well, I'm not just coming back for the sake of it or getting involved with your show because you want me. Justify it. What do you want me to do? What's this plot? What's the story that you're going to see me? So much of these times productions are rushed. Discovery certainly had a challenging sort of pre-production period. It did. And production period. But, this is someone where it's like you're Jason Isaacs and you're like, you want me, earn it. Go write a great character that makes me want to come onto your TV show, because I certainly don't have to, But and I really love the character of Lorca, and it was exciting to dive back into it again. I liked him a lot as well. Maybe he could become a Picard or a Cisco or something like that, or a Kirk. So I like that sort of flip role reversal. But then I like how we didn't get that sort of payoff, and we got something kind of more interesting out of it. Yeah,
I think you're right with everything you've said there, especially in regards to Isaacs, because he plays it so well. I'm constantly mesmerised by him. I think especially in these prison scenes. And in episodes later on as well, even like the following episode, which unfortunately I watched earlier, and I keep having to stop thinking about that episode because I keep going, oh, I'm going to talk about that. No, that's not in this one, Kurt. But yeah, so the fact that, he's able to, I mean, one of the first things he asks, Ash is like, you lying, kind of thing. And he's completely aware of his surroundings. He's always thinking on his feet, really. And it tells, especially in the next episode. But with this one, he's, he has that authority. He does seem to have the ability to, to work his way out of situations. But also the choices that he makes as well, when we find out later on, obviously why, but, the likes of leaving Harry in the chamber, in the prison cell when they do leave, and his reaction to Ash, and, he's always watching, and he's always like saying, bringing the people he needs around him and things. I think that really works to his the way that he acts that and the way he portrays that. And, the actual, some of the writing, you mentioned about the writing. I mean, the writing for this one especially is the way that Stewart's involved, which is the pet spider kind of thing that Mudd's got, that he puts those nuggets in there before the torture scene with Laurel. What did you make to that torture scene for the start off, and just those little nuggets that he did put in to it, so that you can definitely tell that someone was there, which obviously takes the onus away from Ash, and obviously it's more the fact of Harry Mudd's the culprit for it.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting idea. I like the idea of this sort of like this choose your pain kind of thing, because I think when you sort of think of the Klingons, it became quite, post Deep Space Nine, a little bit boring, and then on Enterprise, like their fangs are sort of slightly kind of blunted, I thought. And I really think kind of Discovery I watched that and I thought, Jesus, that is a warrior race. That's not just a race that tells me they're a bunch of warriors that talk about it and big up. This is like, Jesus, like, you see what they're doing and so on. And I thought it was really kind of interesting in sort of that prison room of like, you know, it stops them becoming quite chummy and having sort of people that they bounce off of. And unfortunately for sort of Harry Mudd, Ash Tyler, quote unquote, was able to find a partner that he could sort of play off of and kind of get on out.
So speaking of Ash Tyler, what do you think to his introduction here? Because he's in the first part of the actual prison scenes, he's not around, but he is hiding in the background. And we quickly find out that Ash, at this point in time, that we are aware of that basically that L'Rell's taken a liking to him, and that he's survived these 7 months, and he's quite idealistic in this iteration of Ash Tyler's story, really, because Mudd says about going back to Lorca that don't be so idealistic. Have you heard what Lorca did on the Buran, for example? That he blew up his own ship with everyone on board, and the like. How do you think that worked between the three of them as a kind of an ensemble piece, and during that scene to kind of get the idea of who each of these people are?
I would say I'll start with the criticism. For a person that's been in that prison 7 months, I wish he was in sort of a more tatty uniform or something like that. Yeah. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much just fresh off the production line. So that was a criticism. I really liked it, and I think it's another one where it's something that it's probably part of more of a larger conversation that I can become a bit frustrated sometimes with perhaps, and it kind of ties back into some of the criticism, things like Discovery or Picard or whatever, getting stuff. And like, boy, those shows do things sometimes that deserve real kind of criticism that we can be pulling apart. But then things like with this episode where it's kind of like, fans will say, oh yeah, he's this or that, as opposed to sort of going, right, let's go with the journey, let's see how things kind of unfold. Because I remembered watching this episode thinking, right, there's got to be something kind of going on with this Lorca character. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm gonna go along with it. I know there was some rumours online and so on, but I tend to kind of avoid that stuff. And I was just like, holy shit, like he blew up his own ship for such a reason. That is cowardly. I kind of can get his justification, but wow, I couldn't imagine any other kind of captain doing that. And then when it kind of gets to the payoff about Lorca's intent, you're like, okay, right, I can buy into that. That makes sense. And again, it sort of ties in that this Lorca character can get away with so much. He's essentially blown up his own ship and killed all hundreds of people. And he has now continued to find employment within Starfleet and so on. It's all really quite interesting, and I think it's fascinating to kind of watch these three kind of play off each other. And yeah, there certainly promises a lot more with Lorca and what kind of went on with the Buran.
Yeah, it does, and I think the things that they've seeded in, which is obviously as part of an arc, storytelling arc, is that I think that Lorca mentions at some point in the near future, whether or not it was in this episode or the next one, about the Klingon fighting style that Ash does. You learn a lot on that prison ship, which is a nice little story element there. But the fact that Ash is so idealistic and that Harry's able to use that to his advantage and then tell the Lorca story, and it brings out the thing in Lorca. I think it's a well written scene from that in that regard, and the way they break out the prison as well is interesting. That that Ash is saying choose me, and they use that to get out of the prison. And the way that Ash has actually said, which I quite liked, the way that it says, well, I was waiting for the right person to be in here to be able to do this with. Which obviously adds another layer of the fact that Lorca is that person. It definitely wasn't going to be a Harry Mudd who would weasel his way out. This Lorca is going to be one that's a warrior and a warmonger as such, which is what Stamets used the word for him, to get out of there and to be able to physically do what they need to do. So I think that works really well. So other than that, really, I don't think is there anything else that you can think that I need to bring up with regards to this episode that I may not have touched upon.
No, I think it's definitely sort of part of an interesting kind of approach of new TV generation kind of Star Trek, that a lot of what we're discussing in here gets paid off in other episodes. We kind of see more about sort of, Lorca's eyes, what went on with the Baran, this kind of plot line, which has kind of maybe ended with sort of the tardigrade, Stamets, he's kind of taken on some of this sort of transport kind of power. There's a lot kind of things that are going on that will pay off, and we're probably so used to things in Star Trek of like, oh, we'll maybe come back to that in the future, or we'll maybe have a bit of an arc over a few episodes, or a non-existent magic reset button at the end. But this kind of promises a lot, where it is exciting to debate and discuss these episodes in real time. I think the challenge can be sometimes when we as fans maybe bring in outside information and knowledge, whether it's like production pictures or rumors on the internet, and kind of dent sort of the discussion by trying to kind of tip our hand a bit too early. Sometimes I think it's good to try and just enjoy these episodes in isolation, go into the next week, maybe watch the promo. I think sometimes there's so much information out there in magazines, spoilers, Reddit, forums, people that are kind of dropping into comments going, well, of course this is actually going to be this and stuff like that, and feeling kind of excited about spoiling something for it. I think this is one of these episodes where it's a good episode, it pays off quite well in the future, and it's kind of an exciting one to talk about. And I wish we could have almost had this discussion as it kind of dropped out of like, yeah, what is with the eye thing? Is it just at face value? Or are we going to see more of the tardigrade in the future? We can sort of know more about what's to come, which is good and frustrating, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good from the point of, without getting too spoilery, we draw a fine balance between, going through everything in detail, but, the larger arcs we're kind of looking at. But it's also interesting, as you say, some of the kind of criticisms from the point of view of, trying to find out what's going on there, what's going to happen there, what's going to happen here, and that was all the thing for Star Trek Picard. The fact that we were able to, we're late to the show in some ways, that to be able to do that with Discovery, but we were able to do that with Picard, and we'll be looking forward to doing that on season 3 of Discovery as well. I think that we've started doing that with the trailer coverage that we recently did. But I do want to talk briefly about some of the aspects of fans and spoilers and stuff like that as well, which we'll talk about just as we look into the mailbag, which we're going to do right now. And going back from what we were just saying, one of the things that Tony Black says is about this episode is it's not bad. I'm not very much a fan of the new Harry Mudd, really, but the Lorca Ash stuff is decent, and I challenge anyone who to have guessed who the latter was this early on. It's fairly middle of the road beyond that, not enormous amount that is memorable. So he's saying it's kind of like along the road, it's just one that will tick off. As you mentioned there, things have a lot of things pay off later on, and I think it's a lot of setup more than anything. I'm not sure that I would totally agree with that. I still think it's probably better than Tony thinks it is, his opinion of it anyway. But the challenge anyone to have guessed who the latter was this earlier on, this goes to the point that you were saying really, is that there was a lot of rumours about, who Lorca was and who Ash was, even at this point. Looking back at some of the reviews, there was already, people intimating who Ash was, and you would find out that they were right, and was it kind of already intimated that was going to happen? And you mentioned the mirror scene at the end of Stamets. So from that point of view, you tend to try to avoid all of that and just watch it as it is, I'm guessing then. So just the promos and stuff like that. Yeah,
I knew that it had broken out sort of the mirror universe thing, because I think of this Jonathan Frakes thing, and I found it hard not to be slightly spoiled by. But it's things like where it frustrates me with like the Ash Tyler thing.
Yeah.
For better or worse about the plot twist, it's things like that where I wish sometimes I was my girlfriend, or sometimes a member of the Joe Public that was just really excited about Star Trek but not influenced by sort of the online culture and debate and discussion, where it's like, well, Shazad Latif is this person. It's like, it's good to kind of dive into these things and uncover them, but sometimes I just wish it was confined to within this sort of the TV show experience, because then you get to people where I think it's completely different from John Harrison, where it's like, it's not canon, guys, wink wink, to something like this where it's like, they're doing something quite, it's an interesting concept and stuff like that. They're going to go with it. I watched that with my girlfriend. She was like, oh, that is a really cool kind of twist. Yeah, it's a bit silly, but I never saw that one coming. I enjoyed that sort of twist. Whereas us, sometimes fans go, yeah, we knew that 10 episodes ago when sort of we figured out the casting sort of thing. That's kind of not within the spirit, I kind of feel, and stuff like that. And I think it becomes kind of a bit frustrating and a bit kind of arrogant that people will kind of try and undo sort of the TV experience, because for a lot of people, they've not enjoyed sort of weekly Star Trek in decades, really, and it's kind of nice to try and just enjoy episodes in isolation and then go, right, let's discuss them, what's going to happen there, without sort of playing our hands and trying to kind of spoil things, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a line of doing what you think. Tony says there, in fact, I challenge anyone to have guessed. There's a difference with guessing and challenging what you think is going on. Like, you could, in theory, watch an episode of Star Trek Discovery and spot something and go, he said this. I wonder what that's about. Or why is his eyes like that? Or the mirror. Oh, I've watched Star Trek before. I know what a mirror means in a lot of ways. But then there's the other side of things, which is actively trying to find out what it actually is. It's not doing it for the joy of the show. It's doing it because you want to be clever and want to be seen as I've worked it out. Where, having a good, healthy debate about, so why is it Ash all of a sudden come into this episode right now? What's his deal then? And why did Lorca blow his ship up? That's really un-Starfleet of him. I wonder what that could mean. And putting those things together and as hypothesizing a potential route they could go down, and then finding out you're right or you're wrong, I think is healthy. But as I say, going down the other route, I think is detrimental to the TV show. And I would say I didn't get caught up in it, but it was almost inescapable if you were watching it week on week, and things would kind of break in that you're in the fan groups and stuff. So towards like the middle of the run, I mean, we're on episode. We're on this episode now, but towards the back end of the season, I just went, I'm going to have to just stop doing this and just watch it week in, week out, and not worry about any reviews and stuff like that at all, because that's the way it is. So Craig McKenzie says, I'm torn on this one, as there are a lot of things I like about it, but there is some clumsiness there too. Saru looking up the names of competent captains to reassure himself is a really weird way of injecting some fan service into the situation, even if I understood the idea behind it. Rainn Wilson is superb in his role, but to call him Harry Mudd is bizarre because he bears little resemblance to the original. The original series, Harry Mudd was endearing yet bumbling, where this one is devious, calculating and amoral. I don't see why they went down this route. All the stuff with Ripper and Stamets was really interesting, and it was a strong episode for Burnham, who has her arc furthered in really compelling ways. So what do you think to Craig's? I know that your fellow Scotsman Craig there is someone that you know quite well. What do you think to his comments there?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it comes down to the fact that it could have been Harry Mudd, it could not have been Harry Mudd, and I think kind of Craig kind of captures that well. I mean, I recently rewatched Hi Mudd, I think it was, or Mudd's Women. I can't remember what the first episode was.
Mudd's Women.
It's Mudd's Women. And I watched that, and yeah, it is quite a different character, but I suppose if we were kind of to go down this sort of nerdy route, well, time does kind of pass between this and sort of Enterprise, and maybe becomes sort of like, trades in being mischievous for becoming like a serial kind of, shagger or something like that. I don't know, and stuff like that. It's it could have been done without it. Could have been a brand new character. I'm not completely. If I was in the writer's room and someone pitched it as Harry Mudd, I wouldn't be kind of attached to the idea of like, let's definitely go for it. It is what it is, kind of thing. And I think Craig kind of highlights the criticism that I think can be levelled at the Mudd character in particular in this episode quite well. Yeah.
Okay. Brett Williams says this is the episode that cemented my paranoia about Lorca not being right, and realising the theories about him were right. I loved this Mudd as a guy that truly resents Starfleet and sees the mess that lay left in their wake. And then he says, I forgot this is the one with the Ripper Burnham Stamets story as well. Certainly didn't seem Starfleet, and that they'd abuse an animal for the drive to work. And I really like the idea that Stamets, who was up to now was shown as self-centered, makes a choice to use himself in a manner that could get him into serious trouble. Burnham's choice to free the Ripper bolstered the do the right thing mentality of Starfleet. Those are a couple of things that we've mentioned actually during the course of the episode, but what do you think to Brett's comments there?
Yeah, I think I agree with them as well and stuff. Like, yeah, I think I like, this is what I enjoy. I love kind of hearing the mailbag kind of thoughts and stuff like that. It's, I think, I find it hard to disagree. Yeah,
I do. I think it's, I think the, what was he saying about the abuse of the animal to drive to work, and really like the Stamets, showing he was self-centered and to choose to use himself in a manner that could get him into serious trouble. Because that's something that this ship does quite a lot of, really, doesn't it? It's, Stamets is, we mentioned about the eugenics before. You've got Michael as a mutineer. You've got Lorca, who's obviously, not of source, but people don't really know that. And we'll delve into his character in further episodes in which, he does get to keep Discovery, but there is an issue where he could potentially lose his ship. So there's all that kind of aspect to it as well. But we do have these characters. They're not the classic, this person is fairly well defined. It's, they all are characters who are damaged in some way.
And I think the one person that probably closest isn't to is sort of Tilly. She is probably the traditional, conventional Starfleet, kind of ethos, kind of values, slightly nerdy. She's probably a bit like the fans in a way to an extent as well. I think she's really good. And as I kind of tied to earlier, I think this season is a prequel as such for getting towards perhaps that season 2 where it's like, right, let's go out there and, seek out new life forms and new civilizations, whether that's a Red Angel or going to a place like New Eden. They're going through the rough part first. And I think it's interesting to sort of see these characters damaged, and hopefully kind of by the beginning of season 2 is that they're in a positive place. They've become a bit of a family by the end of season 1. We get to learn more about the bridge crew. It all sort of nicely develops in a really interesting way. And, whether this is what kind of fans want to see in their Star Trek remains to be seen. But I certainly like that kind of approach.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect chance and perfect way to end our coverage for today. So thank you very much, Lee, for coming on. What have you been up to at the recently, and how can people find you online, and what podcasts and stuff are you currently on?
Yeah, I host and produce 2 of my own podcasts. One's the A24 Project, where we go through the A24 filmography, 2 films at a time every 2 weeks. And in between, we have interviews with the directors, writers, producers. We've got an episode dropping on May the 4th, another one of our interviews. And it's going to be with David Lowry, who directed and wrote a ghost story in the upcoming Green Knight, which was really exciting. And another podcast I have is called Filibuster, where it's also on the Nerd Party Network, and it's a kind of open forum geek pulp culture, anything like that, and we have a lot of interviews there as well. And on a Trek side, recently I had the opportunity to interview Nicholas Meyer, which was unbelievable. And I just released an episode where I spent 80 minutes talking with Brandon Braga about how he writes Star Trek. I got his thoughts on Discovery and Picard, and that was an absolute treat to spend an evening in lockdown with Brandon Braga. So you can find that episode too. And I've got an episode that I would recommend subscribing to that I think is a lot of fun. One of my mates, as we kind of touched on earlier, there is like 778 episodes of Picard, of Star Trek, movies, blah, blah, blah. I have a mate that has seen 777 of them, and the one episode he has not watched are These Are the Voyages. So we are going to be catching his reactions to watching that final episode he's got to complete, which is a lot of fun considering the controversial nature of the episode. So yeah, I touch on Star Trek here and there in my own way as well. So yeah, both worth checking out, hopefully.
Fantastic. There's a few things there that I'm aware that you've done just through talking to people, and I haven't listened to yet, but the Nicholas Meyer one is definitely one I need to listen to as soon as possible. And I saw your Brandon Braga, a couple of tweets that you've put on about Brandon Braga. So those are 2 I definitely want to get my head round and listen, get the earphones on. And
it's finding the time, isn't it, during lockdown? Yeah. I'm so far behind on podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky in the fact that I'm still driving to work, so I've still got 20-40 minutes to do stuff. But even so, my time is taken up by everyone being at home doing podcasts, and I'm turning up at home after work and going, right, record that, edit that, go to work, record that, edit that, go to work. So that's my life at the moment. But no, thank you very much, Lee, for coming on. No doubt you'll be back on the Make It So in the future. So thank you. You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. You can also find my Millennium podcast, which I show run, which is the Time Is Now pod. That's at the Time Is Now pod. And then also, obviously, Make It So, as always. And the Xcast, you'll find me on the Xcast as well. As I mentioned earlier, we did an Xcast live at the time of recording during this lockdown, which we're hoping to do a few more of. So we'll see how that develops. And
I really want to watch that next one. I missed it last night because I was watching a Netflix show with my girlfriend. So right. I'm hopefully to watch your next one.
It certainly was fun, and it's still on there if you did want to watch it. It's about an hour.
Awesome.
It's about an hour and 10-15 minutes long. But we had great time with JJ Lendl as well, which was great to see him and have a good time with him. But yeah, so that'll be probably still on the Facebook group actually. So feel free to go and have a look at that, and hopefully we'll have some more available as well. And don't forget that we are on the We Made This Podcast network, and you'll be hearing some clips of some recent episodes that we've aired on the network, so feel free to listen to that. But until next time, we're going to set a course for the next episode and engage.
Previously on the We Made This network. Pick a disc.
Particularly last night as well, so I did a late night run to IKEA to get, because
I would imagine it's probably quite good running music.
Possibly, but I don't actually listen to music when I'm running. I'm not my running dipped a lot.
Not run at all.
Yeah, but for the in terms of driving up the M5/M6,
yeah,
it's atmospheric music. It's very atmospheric, like particularly if you're going at the speed limit.
You can't go at the speed limit on the M5. Always roadworks. Actually, I haven't driven on it for ages because it's always roadworks. It might be clear now.
The Time Is Now, a Millennium podcast.
I remember Lance came by and picked me up to go to that. And as I was walking out to the car, we were meeting out at the car, and he saw someone's wallet, that somebody had lost their wallet. It was lying on the ground. And Lance, was ready to put the whole thing. I mean, we were, I think we might have even been kind of running late for this thing, and we really needed to get on the road and get downtown and get to this convention. But, he picked it up, and he wasn't going to go until we could kind of figure out whose wallet it was and how to get it back to them and all of this. And he just, because he saw it, he took ownership of that moment.
Without a mouse.
This week I have a very special guest. She is the co-host of the Tomorrowland Transit Authorities, one of my favourite podcasts, and she is also on YouTube with the channel Ivy Winter. It is Christine. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
This episode's not going up till near the end of April.
Well, by that time I'll have already been in Disney World, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, we both will, because I'll be back by then, if the coronavirus hasn't closed the park down.
I think Mickey will persevere. I think we'll be all right.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website, wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.